Good evening. You are listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Xtreme Studios here in the Pinellas Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida, aka the old Hollywood East, as it were. We're going back in time and doing Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious, considered by many one of the better films of all time, certainly here in America. And with me to discuss this film from the Great Midwest, of course, I have RDV, the Tuesday night action staple standby guy that discusses all that crap with me here on Extreme Movie Show. And of course, young Professor Pixel, that 20-something dashing guy that may not even heard of half the people we talk about. And that's why we do this here at the Extreme Movie Show. And with Notorious, gentlemen, let me start off by saying, yes, it's a Hitchcock film. Yes, Hitchcock gets a lot of credit for lots of things, and there's a lot to love about this film. You could argue a lot of things to the contrary because he's a very particular type of person that would not listen to actors at all. They were meat. They are fodder for his visions. And you know what? That's back in the good old-fashioned studio days when you weren't allowed to kiss more than 30 seconds. But some good things came out of it, such as leading men and leading women, and this strong sense of class here in this film, because they don't come out and say that there's communists in here. They don't quite come out and say some things that we would say in today's world. But boy, this movie really stands up because it's well acted. I think the third act is phenomenal. I could argue that here you've got Cary Grant as a leading man that has absolutely no interest visually in his assignment, as it were, which is of course Ingrid Bergman, that everybody's super hot for. So she makes him sleep with her old person that was in love with her. Actually, you could argue very strongly as the bad guy, the Invisible Man himself, could be this most sympathetic character, but yet somehow you don't come away hating any of these characters. You just go, shit, this frigging works at the end. And really all that happens is there's a setup, there's balls, there's mysterious wine, and then there's a key, and then there's a walk down a flight of stairs, up a flight of stairs, and that's it for a 2-hour movie. But damn it, that's all you need because it's that friggin' good. Artie, I'm going to hand it over to you for your initial take on this film here. Is this a first watch for you? What's your initial take?
This is the first watch for me, and just like every movie from the 40s, man, it could be one of the worst movies you've ever watched, but the 40s is kind of like plot armor. Just the way everything is, the culture, the scenery, the way they talk, the way, just everything, the black and white, Hitchcock has been rated as one of the best directors from the decade. This is my third, probably my third Hitchcock movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, I think it's my first Cary Grant one. I don't think I've watched Cary Grant in another movie. I've watched
with what we've covered here so far in Extreme Movie Show. That is correct, because we've done Rear Window, we've done this one, North by Northwest. So you're right.
Yeah. So I'm used to watching the Great Peck, and was it Kill Mockingbird? Was another one. It wasn't Hitchcock though, but so I've watched the Great Peck movies. So this is my first Cary Grant, and I'm thinking like Cary Grant is that the guy who sings in the rain?
No, that's Steve Kelly.
Steve Kelly. So, okay, I get them confused because they both are a little. Anyway, this was I love these like Casablanca. I mean, like I love like these World War II movies, and then they're going into Rio de Janeiro, and just like I said, seeing the world back then, the technology they had, everything's. There was no smartphones. There was no people in iPods.
Everybody's smoking.
Yes,
having ice down in Miami was a big deal because there wasn't air conditioning back then yet. Absolutely,
people just drinking, having fun, and then it's the cops on the motorcycle cops. It's just like it was. I just love the whole, the whole culture, the whole life. That back then. Obviously, this is fictional, but like I said, when we watch any movies, we watch, especially with Chuck Norris. I like looking at San Francisco before becoming a shithole. I like looking at places like this. It's just fun. It's a time capsule.
Yes.
Yeah, and man, like I said, I love the music from the 40s and 30s. I would love to live in the 40s, but only if I'm old enough not to go to war.
Yeah, and the thing too with the post-war boom here in the United States, and of course, a lot of people went to the movies during the war and came out of it, and so there was a certain kind of optimism building, and it's interesting you mention all those things too, because the way movies are made today are a little bit different. We don't have the studio system like that existed. I call him Remington Steele, Cary Grant, because looks great in a suit, and he's one of the older actors that I go, yeah, even though everybody wore suits like Bogey and everybody else, he just to me made the suit look really good. And so I joke about him doing that. But then of course Hitchcock had a predilection for having blondes, a lot of them that could be morally ambiguous, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But Pixel, it's got to be a first watch for you being only 20 something, because that means by the time you're 14 and 19, that's when you watched your 1200 plus episodes of Dark Shadows, a Dan Curtis production, before you got to this. Am I right?
This movie, yes, this movie is a first watch for me. It's very good. I was very excited when we talked about it last week. Obviously, last week I was not in the brightest of moods towards the film, but this one I love it. I love it. And Venkman was right. He said that the two movies, plot wise, are very similar. Yes, and I think the execution of this one is fabulous. It's a thriller, and it's all the actors, they do a great job. Cary Grant, to me, he was a convincing leading man.
Yeah,
even knowing what I know.
Sean Connery approved when he hits her hands off the steering wheel, and just tells her,
up a bit.
Yeah.
Well, let's set the movie up here a little bit for those that haven't seen it, because this is a movie that doesn't get talked about a lot, even though people are aficionados of movies and all that, especially Hitchcock. Hitchcock had a penchant for trying to film most everything inside. He storyboarded everything. He was the type of person that said, we're going to do everything like this at all, and I don't care what you actors say, just take it from my cue. And so you definitely know there's a Hitchcock style to it, so much so that we've talked about things in Rear Window that came up with the gorgeous set pieces. Simple elegance of the way people dressed back in the 40s certainly helps, especially in a black and white film. And I think when you have a situation like you have with Cary Grant playing not a smooth ladies man, but a government agent whose job it is to recruit the daughter of a convicted German scientist. I did not say Nazi, but that's implied. And of course, back in the 40s, historically speaking, you had America and a few other places taking a lot of the remaining Nazis. And you could argue whether or not that's why communism spread. And we've talked a little bit briefly, the spy stuff in the 70s, the more cynical stuff, you and I, RDV, about the boys in Brazil and hunting for Nazi hunters and all that kind of stuff. This isn't that kind of a film. But the point is this young woman whose father's convicted, we don't know of what or why, even though that happens very early on. She's a socialite. She likes to party. She likes to get her drink on by 40 standards or any age standards, really. She likes the company of men. And Cary Grant's there to kind of play himself into it and recruit her to say, hey, there's this dude that was a friend of your father's that had the hots for you. I want you to get some information from him. He's down in Rio. We're going. And so that's pretty much the setup of the film when they get down there, but not before they get hot for each other early on and quickly.
Yeah, it's very similar to, if you watch Mission Impossible 2, it's kind of same setup. He's got to hire for a job, and then they don't tell him that they need to do this. Then he's falling in love with him, and he's reluctant to talk about it during dinner. And finally she basically makes him sell it, and then she gets kind of upset a little bit because she's like, you didn't stand up for me, do you want me to go? And he's like, what's up to you?
Yeah.
He's very reluctant. This is a guy who basically his job comes first. He's not really a lover. He's more by the book.
Well, he's a professional, and what I liked about his role here, even though he doesn't come across as the hot leading man in that sense, like that we think of when we think of Cary Grant, he comes across as a guy that's got a lot of experience under his belt. We know that he really does care for her, but he wants it to be real, where she makes all the decisions, where she can't come back and say, well, you made me do it or this or that. And so he kind of tries to help her along, but can't really tell her or do too much. And I think he's a little shocked that she kind of not only says yes, but then ends up with a bombshell about halfway through the movie where she's like, well, he wants me to marry him, and I got to give him an answer. That's where the movie, to me, starts to take a really interesting turn because, as I said earlier, the Invisible Man himself, Claude Rains, he's incredible in here because he plays the older man, but he doesn't play him like he's slick, like he's using a younger woman. He plays as somebody that almost dotes on her and just generally is affectionate towards her and is not an asshole or treats her in any sort of way that by today's standards, we could consider to be real easy. She's not his bitch or anything like that at all. He really does care for her, and you see that, and you're like, wow, you can understand how he's kind of simping out for her, getting a chance to really live a crush. And when it's Ingrid Bergman, for God's sake, she's playing both sides here. She's phenomenal at being able to do that. He's kind of taken aback by how she's able to do that. And so there's this tension between both of them. And you could say it's romantic tension or sexual tension, whatever you want to call it. I just look at it and go, this is different than what we're used to thinking with Cary Grant. Now, calling him Remington Steele, Professor Pixel, when I talk about Cary Grant, we try to set some patterns up here and compare them to other things. What did you make of this whole 40s thing about them only being able to kiss with no tongue for only a second or two at a time, and the whole physical affection part? Because it's very blatantly spelled out that they've had relations, and yet he's basically hooking her out to the old dude. I mean, did you catch that in the film, or what's your take on it?
Oh yeah, you could catch what they implied. The whole reason they were talking about whenever the guy said, "Well, you must prove it to me," and she says to the people, "Well, he wants me to marry him," and they're like, "Oh well, I'm sure she can get him home quickly, can't you?" And yeah, I don't see it as her whoring herself out as much. She was reluctant to get right to it because
she said, "Yes, I'll marry him and I'll sleep with him."
Yeah, well, yes, because Cary Grant kept saying no, won't give her any kind of sign that he actually does madly love her.
But why should he?
Well, because I mean, shit, that's what she's telling him.
She was trying to change for him in the very beginning. She was trying to change, 8 days sober, and she was trying to do everything with him.
Well,
now you could say that maybe she was trying to lead him on,
right?
But
I don't see that.
But with the way they were going, I felt like she honestly wanted to sign from him, but he wasn't. He didn't want to say that. He didn't want to admit that he had feelings. You could see in his face he was kind of torn.
Yep.
But the job comes first.
Yep.
But then throughout the movie, they're kind of spiting each other. Doing stuff.
That's true love, by the way. That's just their way of flirting.
Yeah.
It's equivalent to the car chase scene in Mission Impossible.
No, because they aren't killing people.
So I love what Ed says. He could have been the 40s James Bond.
Yes, absolutely. I
see it. He's got that Roger Moore look.
Yeah. Well, when the movie's going on, we quickly get to Rio, and we know that the Germans are there, and let's just call them American agents, have an office there, and they explain what's going on, and they set up a rendezvous for them to meet and everything. Like to your point, RG, about seeing scenes back then, even though it's backward projection and all that, and they just have like a place that they're sitting down in front that they meet to go over talking and stuff. It's well done, and there's some great shots, and I think the music's not distracting, and I think it adds to it enough. It's very lush when we see the Rio. We feel like we're there a bit, and I gotta tell you, this guy's man cave, holy crap, I don't know what he did for a living besides steal Nazi gold, but the dude had a ton of money, and when he was living up in Brazil where it would go really, really far. And like I say, it's interesting because he was only like say 5'6", and Cary Grant was more say taller than average, right? So you see him, and Ingrid Bergman herself's fairly tall for a woman, especially in the back and forth. She might be 5'7", 5'8". I'm not Googling any of this crap, but just looking at it, you could tell a couple scenes it was off. But the guy's got such great charisma and such presence about him without being overpowering. That's one of the things that I thought was great. And actually, as much as I think of Cary Grant as a leading man, I think acting-wise, to me, instead of just being smooth and sophisticated, I thought this actually challenged him a bit more, because he had to play hey, I am interested in you, but I am older than you, and I've seen stuff like this happen before. And if this is going to work, you need to kind of grow up and take things seriously and come to me willingly, rather than you relying on me telling you what to do, because I want us to be lovers, not you're just something I'm messing around with. And that is the tension they have. And she's so kind of beside herself. She's just you don't know if she feels guilty about her dad, or if there's some secret there or whatever. But we find out that there's other scientists there that he knows. And so she's been tasked to say, well, try to find out all their names and what they do. And so Cary Grant meets with her, and he's like, you know what? And this is kind of where you can see that they're really on totally different positions here, but it's so obvious what's happening. Where it's like, why don't you just throw a shindig next week or like that? Invite me to, he knows that you know me, and if you invite me, you could sit there and say that, well, it's because you're married now that I'm there. I can see how happy you have it, so he won't have any need to arouse suspicion. Because the first bit of tension to me is when they're at the horse racing scene and they're meeting, going over some secret talks, and you see him watching them out of his binocs. Because I'm a sucker for voyeurism and binocular shots, and he comes down there and is like, well, it looked like you two knew each other, and is like, well, da da da, tip on the racehorse and all that. And then all of a sudden something happens. You realize you're more than an hour into the film, and they have this big elaborate production, and everything has to settle down on, you know what, there's a key to a room that's supposed to be a supply room to the wine cellar that I can't get from him. Something must be there. And it's hokey and it's stupid. I don't know if it's Utica, like Utica, New York, or Unica, I don't remember the name. And there's this phenomenal scene. If I go back to Rhett Butler at the top of the stairs looking down at Scarlett, and just him, walking all the way down looking at her, and that's a real famous scene. This is almost like it, where you see it where she's managed to sneak the key out and she has it in her hands, and the camera shot. This is phenomenal. It's this big wide shot and it kind of comes all the way down, zooms in on her hand while she's standing there with her husband. And Cary Grant comes up and she's trying to like sneak it to him. You're like, okay, the spy shit is on. And then for the next few minutes trying to go down there and find this bottle of wine that accidentally gets knocked over, and it's dirt, and they hide it and clean it because people are coming because they know they're running out of champagne. So he does the only thing that a romantic would do, especially Cary Grant. He says, basically, shut up and kiss me. I want them to see this. So when they come out, they make it like, oh, he's a drunk fool and there's nothing she could do. So that's the perfect excuse to kick him out and all that stuff. And you're like, oh, this is bullshit. But then a party goes, fuck, it works. And it's just a great, nice little tense scene. And it reminds you that for an hour and 15 minutes, if you get everything set up right, then pull the trigger. I'm telling you, RDV, it's like that Chuck Norris template. You just set it all up and you're waiting for that one stupid kick. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, you launch enough grenades. After a while, you finally at the end you get the bazooka, and then you get the one kick, and it's like, man, it all comes together with that one kick at the end. And everything's been absurd to this point, and then that one kick just ties it all together. Man, like I said, watching this, man, I'm like, there's a movie going on. I'm just getting lost in Ingrid Bergman's eyes, man. She is just beautiful.
She's hypnotic. She's got the classic Swedish kind of looks, though, too. She just naturally got great genes.
I loved her in Casablanca.
Yes.
Seeing her in this again, it's cool. I was looking up the ages because because back then, whenever they have the leading man, he's usually 25 years older or whatever. He was only 11 years older than her at the time. She was 31. He was 42. So that wasn't that bad.
20. I mean, my God.
I know exactly. She actually is she's a Swedish. I was looking it up, Cary, because I was looking like Cary Grant, and like he kind of looks like Gregory Peck a little bit from an angle, in the sense, but because they go through in their 40s when they're doing their movies, but overall, probably one of the best romance dramas, noir, other than Casablanca and a few others, plot wise, not the most strongest plot wise, but Ingrid Bergman makes up for all of it. I don't need anything else.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's interesting because you go, how is this movie supposed to end? And I think we're all kind of.
Well, yeah, she gets they're poisoning her because he can't. So then,
yes.
the guy is such a pushover. Like the guy is doting on her, Alexander, whatever, or Sebastian.
His mom runs the show.
So Devlin basically says, hey, we should take her to the hospital. She's sick, and he agrees. But he's like, I should go with you. He's like, no, you should stay here. And they basically leave him to his demise, and they drive away. That's how it ends. But I'm like, yeah, all about a plot for stolen uranium.
Yeah, and the idea too, I think back then is that most people weren't necessarily aware of nuclear war and conventions and how that works. I mean, certainly, you had the Manhattan Project and some other things that would, be coming in the decades after that. And so I applaud Hitchcock for having this as kind of this, and that's his term for it, the MacGuffin, which everyone acts to act like a smart ass saying, well, the
Yep.
MacGuffin is this. Screw you and your terms. But it's the thing that basically, kind of keeps us dragging along for it, the red herring, if you will, sort of.
Yeah, I was reading up on this. I guess they wanted someone else who sold it. The original producer, David Selznick.
Selznick,
Yeah, he sold the property to Eric KO to raise some quick cash, and he really wanted to get replaced with Joseph Cotten. For those who don't know what Joseph Cotten is, Joseph Cotten was in the Philadelphia Story, but he is also his big thing was he was in for 3 movies. He was in Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, and Journey into Fear. No,
Yeah.
Citizen Kane is probably his biggest one. It's most well known.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that was the start. Yeah. So, how would you think you would have liked it worse or better seeing Joseph Cotten in Cary Grant's place?
I think that I just think that the three's chemistry worked, and the surprise to me again was Reigns, as and I hate to say bad guy
Yeah.
because he's really not, and there was no. You could argue that this movie wouldn't be made today because there would not be this sense of American patriotism, and we have to stamp out the evils of communism, which it's implied. We got to know what they're up to, and there's nice little verbal tense scene back and forth. It is. Its bottom line is
it's more than implied. I mean, she flat out says during one of her rants to her father that he has recorded, "I love this country. I love what it offers, and I will not allow you to raise a hand against it." And
right, but you never hear the term communism or fascism or any of that stuff. It's
Well,
deliberately watered
okay,
down. And my
yes.
point being is that patriotism that would exist, like say Yankee Doodle Dandy or even Casablanca, whether you figure that's a little more cynical or like in here, I don't think you're going to have that in a movie today. That would only work in a movie back then. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that I understand. That I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just saying I feel like it's a little more than just implied. It's heavily implied.
Well, the other thing too is, and this is where Artie and I have talked about this, and so Pix, I know you haven't necessarily been a part of some of the '70s stuff that we talk on culture wise. We've kind of skipped around a little bit with different movies, but we've talked a little bit how in the '70s how spy stuff went more away from the Cold War and cool spy stuff to more government oriented type spy stuff. Like we're supposed to be a part of the government agents. And so here, the office and the people that he deals with, I think it's interesting because Devlin, played by Cary Grant, his character, you could tell his experience dealing with all this before. So he's definitely a man's man. He's a pro, but there's no like hint or subplot of the government people being morons or stupid and I hate to say this, hardcore political. They're just people doing a job. They just happen to be for the government. There's no way that would be in a movie today because of the political nature of what's gone on the past 50, 60 years.
Did like in the beginning they mentioned that the Sebastian's down there, he says the Germans, a lot of them after the war fled down to to Brazil down there, and then the government's trying to weed them out, the Germans out. So it was heavily. He didn't have to say Nazi, but you knew exactly what was going on.
You knew what he meant.
Yeah.
Most of them ended up in our universities and private institutions, but that's a whole other conversation.
It's kind of funny because there were Germans that were fleeing and going stuff, so it was really realistic, in that sense.
And you can almost feel it. Pix, I wanted to ask you some stuff here because, again, we've only done a few of the classic films here, and some of you have been a part of, some of you haven't. But right now, we're starting to see some of the best when we talk about Cary Grant, how people always remember him. I like some other stuff that he's in as well, and he has the ability to play a little bit of a bastard. I know a lot of people are really hardcore with Pierce Brosnan for 007, and he has his own style, which to me is a hybrid, and it's not bad. But when you look at something like Cary Grant, do you see like Pierce Brosnan's or other people? Do you see that this guy was the template that other people after him were made after?
I can see where you could say that. I mean, when you think of classic movie leading mans, you have him, you have Jimmy Stewart, you have, Humphrey Bogart. We've gone over so many Humphrey Bogart movies. But they're all great because they have this presence that just feels like I want to know this man. I want to be this man. And
yeah, 40s leading mans are way
it's
different than
lost.
I said the 40s leading mans to me were more manly than the 80s leading mans. Sorry. I mean, you have Stallone stuff. Yeah. I mean, well, to people, there might be people who really love Stallone stuff. I look at the manly men, you know, back in the 40s stuff because you had to basically, you know, work hard in order to get places, you know. Where 80s is kind of like more kind of set back a little bit more. You had more options, you had more luxuries in life. Where most people grew up on farms in the 40s stuff.
It was a harder life.
Yeah, it was a much harder life. So
Yeah.
you're physically in shape stuff. Not to say that you know Stallone and Arnold and Chuck Norris, you know, we're not badass. I like them, you know, real cool guys. But man, it's just something different when you get to like, you know, Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, you know, even Rock Hudson, man. We know that he was kind of like Cary Grant, 2 peas in the pod. But they just sold it, you know. And I love these noir, like they just you say a few words, you know, quiet like this, and then you like, you know, you grab the girl, tip her over, and then you just kiss her. It's like, you know, it's like they basically manhandle. But the women were into it though. They weren't protesting, saying, "Oh my gosh, I didn't give you consent." You know, none of that crap. It was they didn't think of themselves as being victims or being property.
Yeah, and it's interesting because again with the World War II and all that, and a lot of people being independent, you know, again, as life was more rural back then, and is that significant in films? Well, yeah, that's why the Western was still a really big thing. I've been told about the '60s to '70s, let's say, and the whole idea of independence and freedom and everything, I think is interesting. So, her being a kind of like a playboy socialite. In today's world, we'd roll our eyes and be like, "Oh, this is a bitch. I don't even want to pay attention. I could give a rat's ass about it."
kept thinking,
But Ingrid does such a great job of playing it where you believe her, where you're not like, "Oh, she's a mean girl" or something stupid, where you whatever. They actually go out of their way, even though the plot's paper thin here, to make sure that it's presented a bit differently. Again, with Reigns, you know, head of the table being a good solid man, a man's man himself. Cary Grant as being not the dashing guy, but more the practical kind of guy who still wants her. So Ingrid's got to be on both sides without acting like a little girl, and it's that kind of chemistry is what really surprised me the most about this film.
So it got me to thinking. You know, I was thinking because Pixar, you know, we both watched the Avengers movie. They modernized Captain America went in the ice in 42, then woke up in like 2012, 2013 when that first movie came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking like he should have been canceled because he should have told a woman better in her place. living in the 40s. But yeah, that's Hollywood. Reality, like that, like yeah, he would have been like canceled so bad because there were some jerks back then, but I think as much as people make it out to be women being subservient. But I don't know. It's a different mindset. Like I said, a different culture, and it's so easy for people who live now to judge something that was like 80 years ago, you know, and be like, "Oh, I can't believe this. This is misogynistic and stuff." Unless you actually live back then, you really can't experience it. You're only looking on the outside and judging, you know, so you don't really get the full picture.
Yeah, the scene you mentioned earlier, I wanted to touch upon, and
Which was the car scene.
Well, yeah, because with the way they introduce Cary Grant, he doesn't come in and he's dashing and takes your attention away from everybody.
She's all over from the beginning.
Yeah, she's got this party going on at her house with everybody passed out, passing drinks and everything too, and you know, foreshadows the running out of drinks later on when she's married. But we see the backside of his head kind of there, and then there's some interesting shots when
That's
like
an awesome
she passes
shot,
out
though.
and stuff.
In the
Yeah,
dark.
but when she goes out for a drive and he goes with her, he has to kind of let her lead a little bit. So he's still in charge, but he has to play along. And she's driving, of course, recklessly fast at that time, was anywhere from like 40 to 60 miles an hour. But she's drunk. The cop pulls her over. He shows the cop some papers or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, I'm really, really sorry." So there's this respect for position about things and all that too. And that's the scene where, you know, they're pulled off to the side and he kind of roughs her up a little bit. He basically forces her to not drive, and that's it. I mean, it's not like he backhands her or anything like Cagney would do, let's say, or Bogart.
He was polite to her. He's a gentleman, pure gentleman to her. he was even looking at he had his hand out in case to grab the steering wheel because she was kind of swerving, and she's like, he looked over and she looks at him, she's like, I hate men who smirk at me. So she's like, I'm gonna do 80 now, and he's like, no. Yeah, it was grand smirk at her that she's insulted either way.
Well, he's calling her out on her bluff.
Yeah,
he's letting her know who's in charge. And again, show us, don't tell us, don't have an argument, just show us through some interaction like that moves on. Because then he makes her the Alka-Seltzer afterwards, and he tells her, hey, you're going to do this, and the plane leaves tomorrow. She's like, do I have to? And he's like, no, but it leaves tomorrow, and then they're on the plane. So it's like, yeah, you won.
So, and I just have a special place in my heart for the motion screens behind cars. You know, when they're not really driving, it just looks like they're rocking. I used to love it when Conan O'Brien would do that with Eddie Richter at his desk, and you see him driving. It's awesome.
Well, let's talk about one or two more things here, and they'll wrap it up for the night. Again, a lot of people think this is one of the best Hitchcock movies, period. And of course, Rear Window comes up a lot. Maybe some others. Psycho comes to mind. I think if you get down into the hardcore part of Hitchcock, which is not the purpose of this particular stream here when we're talking about Notorious, is that there's different stages of his career, like you could say about different writers or other directors, let's say, or even other artists in other fields. And I think right now, what I like about this film is the fact that, and chemistry aside with the three people, I do agree that it's a period type piece. You do get the feeling that this is just immediately at the end of the war, post-war. You get a sense of what's going on in the world because of what's happening here, but yet it's dealing with two people. There's talking that's going on, and you have to listen, but there's no bitching or whining, complaining. It's simply talking about the situation moving on. So it doesn't, I think, speed up or slow down. It moves at a pretty solid pace. And the movie seems a bit longer than I thought it would be. And it just almost started to seem like it was going to drag. But what I want to talk about here is the very last, say, 5 to 10 minutes of the ending, because when it ended, I started laughing. I went, yep, I get it. But before we got that, I wanted to ask you, Pixel, was there anything about this film that you want to talk about before we talk about the ending?
I mean, I've talked a bit about it. Again, the only point that I feel I must repeat is that I think plot-wise, it delivered it. It delivered it very well.
What do you think about? What do you think of Alfred Hitchcock's Stanley cameo?
Who doesn't love Alfred Hitchcock appearing in his own movies for just a second?
This guy's a mark for himself, and I kind of don't like that.
So and it's kind of funny that Stanley did that later, and
yeah, well.
So
I think he got it from.
Yeah,
not that I know that, but that's what it reminds me of.
Well, yeah. So when I see Hitchcock, sitting while the two are walking past him, talking. Yeah, he sits in there, he takes his drink, and then he sets it back down. Just the small little role in there, and the fact that he just put himself into the movies and like that wasn't a thing that most people did.
Yep, I concur.
All right, so for the ending, personally, I'm not necessarily crazy about endings that seem to simplify everything by killing off a lot of people or this or that or whatever. They have to have a thing to them. And because this is a thriller, not an action movie, I think it's tremendous how it ends. And a lot of people think there has to be this last little bit of, fade out chorus or like that. This is not a 1970s rock and roll song where it just never ends and you have to fade out and there's a gratuitous guitar solo at the end. It's not the 70s, okay? We find out, and I think it's an interesting part of the movie we really didn't talk about too much, but if you watch this, there's definitely an interesting woman versus woman angle here where Claude Rains' mom, who's living with them and knows everything that's going on, doesn't kind of like her, but she can't verbalize why. It's just her female maternal type instinct. And we see her just enough to know that she kind of is very, very strong and helps her son out. Not that he's a wuss, because he's definitely not. But it's such a great scene when he realizes that he's been played. And he's shattered. It's not like that bitch or haha, she's playing in my hands. Now I can set up the foolish Americans. None of that simple stuff, right? Yeah. He goes to his mom and says, Mom, I'm in trouble. I married an American agent. And it's beautiful. He's sitting there and then they talk to each other like, yeah, I thought blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, how can we handle it? Well, we can't do this. We can't do that. And she's like, I will take care of everything. And because, again, mother's particularly maternal instinct takes over. They decide to poison her. And it's one thing about Hitchcock that I kind of have a love-hate thing with, and this is something we'll dive into as we do more Hitchcock films. He has a tendency, we talk about, the putting an everyman, an average guy in a situation and making them do extraordinary things, whatever you want to call that. But then there's always a description that people like to talk about where they say, no, Hitchcock likes to show you that there's a bomb underneath the table and the two guys talking above it have no idea it's there, so you get more tense. And that's his way of manipulating the audience, which, again, I don't really know, but you have that happen here because they decide to poison her with the coffee. So we see her getting kind of weak and tired. They cut off the phone service. They do have an in-house doctor. After a week or so goes by, he's like, yeah, she's not meeting me. I'm supposed to be leaving to go to Spain. I'm going to go check up on her at her house. And I'm like, oh, bullshit, Carrie. The guy, the butler who you're always nice to, because the gentleman's always nice to the help. He walks up the stairs to his room in the middle of the husband getting ready to come out to talk to him. He talks to her. That's when they kind of have their emotional walls break down and they let each other know that they do care for each other and he's going to help her out here. I'm like, there's no way you're going to get out of here. You don't have a gun. He's got all the bodies. This isn't going to work. I'm like, what the fuck kind of ending is this? And then he gets her. They put the coat on. She's drugged out. They're walking down the stairs. All the other German guys come out and they're like, what's wrong? And he says, and this is where it gets good. He's like, if you tell, because he says it to the husband, I'll let them know what's going on. So they're walking down the stairs while they're all watching and it's real quiet. And it's a lot of stairs too. I think they filmed it where it looks like it's taken forever. And that's the whole tension point.
Yeah.
They get out to the car and he's like, okay, we'll take her to the hospital. And then when he gets in, puts her in, he locks the door and leaves. So when Claude Rains turns around and walks back up the stairs, he's going back because all those other German fuckers are going to put his ass down because now he's let the American agents know what was wrong with the operation. So even though he might have been in charge, it's still, not going to be a good scene. So that's the real tense ending that when you hear about it and you talk about it or you say it yourself, you go, that's not very dramatic. It's the way it's done. And it's done phenomenal because, that's the best way. Like I say this to you all the time, RDV 1982 or whatever it was, 10 at Midnight, Charles Bronson with the rapist at the end. You can't do that to me. I'm sick. I'll just get out. No, you won't. Boom. Shoots the guy dead in the street. Roll credits. That's exactly what happens here. It's a phenomenal ending, and I love it.
And you brought up earlier about, the whole cinematography, man. When he lets her say something drive drunk, point where so that they could just set up for the next scene where she sees him standing in the doorway while she's laying on her couch or whatever, bed or whatever. And then you see the zoom up of the aspirin inside the glass. And then when he walks, he kind of goes upside down as she looks, from her point of view. And then later on at the party from the ceiling camera, you got that. And then the close up of the wine key for the wine cellar.
Yeah,
just all that, it just adds to it, and so many people have basically praised his, cinematography as being one of the best. And you can see how a lot of people have taken it and then worked with it, but it'll never be as good as original. Because you got to have a tense story with that,
Yeah, and I was surprised because it almost feels kind of flat as you're going through this, but again, sometimes you don't realize how emotionally you're invested into it because sometimes there's that one character that draws all the attention, like a Chris Farley or sometimes a Jim Carrey, where they go, I appreciate and respect your enthusiasm and energy level, but you're taking too much away from everybody else. You're not elevating everybody. It's all about you. And if you're gonna be a bitch and own it, fuck you, and I want you to die a horrible, slow death, and that's fine. This movie's not set up that way, but you're going, what the hell's going to happen? They're going to get down there, they're going to get in the car, go off, and then what? You're expecting like a big grand finale, and you don't get that. That's it. So some people might feel like they're cheaping out of the ending, and I'm like, no, it's the opposite. If it's done right, then it's going to, have that impact. And if you don't feel that from watching the whole movie, then this ending's going to be meaningless. Pixel, what's your take on the ending?
I think the ending, you're right. It's kind of a soft ending, but in a good way. I mean, what's going to happen. What's that, okay, well, the leading man finally got his girl. And that's one of the great things about classic movies. There's that sense of, You know what's going to happen, but you want to be there for the journey.
Mhm.
And it was a good journey. And I think the payoff is real nice.
What
Yeah,
was
I'll
up?
say a couple quick
Who
things
doesn't like to
here.
watch a Nazi beg for his life?
Dark Passage. You know he's gonna get it at the end.
Yeah.
You know, trying to think.
Yes.
What was it? No, it was Casablanca. What was the other one we watched with her? And they end up going to Brazil or something, fleeing. Was it? It was Bogart and Bacall, but they end up
It was
meeting.
Key Largo.
It was a Key. That's what it was. Key Largo. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Like I said, Dark Passage is another example of these films that, like, it's so tense, but like you want to root for these people, but there's no way they're gonna survive, and if they do, it's not gonna be it's gonna be a bittersweet ending. Someone's not gonna make it. It's and it's always a dame.
It is, and that's kind of the life thing, and that's again one of the
Yeah.
pluses I have to give this film is that you could argue that you got Cary Grant, who acts sometimes like a butthurt, middle-aged man here, who has got this hot to trot, young woman, and it's like, well, shit, you actually said, yeah, you're gonna marry the other guy. Well, screw you, you slut. And you could go, well, she went along with it. She's a dumb whore. And you go, well, the other guy's just, mama's boy, whatever. And you go, this could fail on so many levels if one of those three people or situations doesn't work, even if the other two do. And that's what I commend this film about, because again, on paper, you look at that and go, that's really kind of what happens. But when you watch it again, the execution of it with the acting and all that makes it. And sometimes you just have one thing go wrong or whatever with the character, and it's going to derail everything, whether it's casting or, well, wait a minute, I think this whole movie, this has gone on, and based off of what I've seen and experienced, this character, there's no way this character would not do this or would do this. And so at the end, the big release we get romantically here is that when he picks her up and all that, gets her coat, and he's picking her up and she's drugged, she's completely helpless. He's swooping in at the last minute to save her. Doesn't matter what's going to happen. He thinks on his feet as literally as they're walking down the stairs, saving her and all that, and she has to yield to him, which she's stubborn and doesn't want to do. It has all this classical type of romantic leading men coming in, saving the woman at the end, after they go through a lot of
Yep.
trials and
Yep.
things that happen to them, whether it's expected or not. And it works. And God, that's such a delicate thing for that to happen, because we see it so often in today's movies where there's got to be a trick at the ending or a gimmick, or God forbid they, added something here after they drove away. If you didn't have the movie end there, I think all that release of tension right there would have fizzled. We'd be like, well, why do we need to have anything else for it? Perfect way to end it. I got to give him credit, because it's not a big dramatic ending with gunshots and a person falling over dead or the news and all that kind of stuff, or people standing around talking. No, it's about really two people, and the fact that a third gets involved there. So you just call it a simple love triangle. And who really cares about the whole setup of it? We don't, and it doesn't need to be important. It is a great film, and
Definitely
I
check
do
it
like
out.
Rear Window and some other stuff by Hitchcock, but this one I think stands out as being a little different. Some others, I'm sure we'll get to Vertigo and
It
some
is
others.
available on Tubi. It's also on
YouTube.
Old Time YouTube under a channel called Old Time Movies.
Mm-hmm.
Man, like I said, whenever I could find these older movies, because a lot of times they're not on streaming networks at all, and services, you can't find them. And if you do find them, it's on DVD or Blu-ray if you're lucky. Yeah, I mean,
Tubi's copy was great.
unless you watch Turner Classic Movies 24/7.
There's a lot out there to
You
do. Yeah.
guys don't?
All right, final thoughts, guys.
Final thoughts, man. Like I said, check this out. It's free to watch. It's on YouTube. It's on Tubi TV. If you've never seen it, it's worth a watch. And let me know, Ingrid Bergman, hot or not? Cary Grant, carry on, son. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to watching some more of the other Cary Grant movies. He has People Will Talk, and I believe he was in another one.
Yes.
Was he? Who was in To Catch a Thief? Was that Gregory Peck?
No, that's the Cary Grant one.
Okay, so that's the one I haven't watched. To Catch a Thief.
Yes, that's a great one. That's fun.
All right, so maybe we'll do that next Sunday. You
Well,
want
next Sunday is Father's Day, so I'll just go and put the special announcement out there now. It's Commando. Make sure you watch it because we'll be discussing Commando as we do every Father's Day. And we'll see what happens on before that. Final thoughts for you, Professor Pixel?
My final thoughts are really an echo of what I've said before. This movie was a fantastic time. I still say it's a very similar plot to Mission Impossible 2, but it's a great execution of it. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. If you have seen it, you might want to rewatch it. You know, it's one of those movies you can enjoy again.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I know Ed's in chat. He's talking about had it. There were so many releases of DVDs in the 90s. I'll just say this in 2000s of older stuff, and things have changed now. And so sometimes it's amazing. You can go and find 4 or 5, sometimes 10 movies of these older ones, and you get a bunch that you go, I don't know they did all this crap. And then, all of a sudden you get the one big one. You're like, oh, that's the selling piece for it. So, physical media rules, but again, Tubi's prints typically do not disappoint. It's nice that it's out there and we have this accessibility. And once in a while, something like this will show up on the big screen. To me, you could put it out today and it would still hold up with other films.
A lot of these magazines and websites, like Time Out or what was it, another French magazine. These out of 100 or 200, they're like in 30th. They're in the top 30. I was like, dang, like that's hard. Like because there's a lot of movies that I haven't seen, but I can only imagine. It's like when I find them, and I like them for different reasons, but I can't settle which one's better.
Oh. And that's over 2 generations too.
I know.
They stay up there with those lists changing. It's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, guys, there you have it. Notorious 1946, I believe it, over to Hitchcock. Check it out. Next week's Commando. Pretty soon we'll be doing New York Ninja. And we also have another movie coming up here too that due to technical difficulties we weren't able to perform Tuesday night.
Next week, all 3 of us, the boys, we're going Commando for Commando.
That's right. Yeah. I will wear no pants.
Get out your chain metal mesh, and I'll tell you why Bennett's
Steve Bennett.
Bennett's the best villain of all time. All right, guys, have a good night. As always, stay extreme.
Yes. Next Sunday we fight for love.